Hello, and thanks for tuning in. I'm really glad you could join us. So, how do you grow a professional services firm? Well, I'm about to show you. And with us today is one of the foremost experts on the topic, Sean Campbell. Now, Sean has been training, mentoring, and educating all of his life, an exceptionally well regarded conference speaker and author. He has delivered talks to Fortune 50 companies and top tier conferences as well. He's also been the author of several books on technical as well as business topics. Now, Sean has also been a professional services firm owner for over 20 years, and his professional services work has spanned consulting engagements with Fortune 50 and startups. You have heard of the sale of this first professional services company and growth of delivery, sales, marketing, and operational practices inside professional service firms. In short, he brings a wealth of knowledge when it comes to surviving and thriving as a service firm owner or the leader of a practice area inside a larger services firm. Sean, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely happy to be here.
So what's going on right now with COVID? How are you seeing the professional service firms are navigating this? And what's kind of some of your best advice, not just to survive, but to thrive during a change in economy?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll go back to what I've noticed firms that struggled kind of missed the boat on is that professional services firms don't really spend a lot on marketing. They don't typically. And it's somewhat unfortunate because when COVID came around and you couldn't go to the conference anymore, you couldn't give a talk, you couldn't fly out to meet the client, you couldn't hang out in the hallway. Everybody knows referrals are a little easier to get when you're in the building. You know, it's easier to get somebody to say, oh, I'll connect you to Stan if you're sitting in a coffee shop and there has to be that extra couple minutes where they think about who Stan is and whether they can make the connection versus when you're virtual and they're like, sure, I'll think about some people, right? And then they get back to you. So there was, I think, a huge number of professional services firms who really, really struggled to get any meaningful leads over the last year. And then there was another set of them who had spent a lot of time on marketing pre-COVID, and they had great messaging, and that messaging clearly articulated what they didn't do just as much as what it did. And they had a refined way of dealing with everything from pay-per-click to organic leads and whatever. And to be honest, because we had all that, we struggled in Q2 last year, like everybody did. But since then, we've been growing, and we kept growing in spite of all this. And some of that's because we lined up with the tech sector for sure. We're kind of blessed that we didn't line up with hospitality or restaurants or, some of the other things as a sector to focus on a million years ago. But I honestly think that's the biggest lesson learned for a lot of people. And I hope they get it, because services firms, to put a bow on this, they've always, I think, thought of it as the relationships we build, the referrals we get, that leads to the next set of work. And as my business partner once said, a lot of these websites exist to simply not disqualify them from getting work. That's about as good as they are. And they don't really do much more than that. And it's a huge miss.
When it comes to doing what you're doing, even in any economic climate, why do you think that no kind of matters more than yes when you're leading a firm like you are?
Well, there's a few things behind that. One is that, and this is maybe just unfortunate, but it's true, people don't trust content. They don't anymore. I mean, they really don't. They don't even trust product descriptions anymore. And to give you some examples, that's right. I mean, just look at what's happened over the last few years in the way people relate through other sectors of the world, right? Whether that's political or social or whatever. We even watching people's reactions to COVID. I mean, I feel like I have been bombarded this past year with one set of my friends telling me it isn't real, and another set of my friends telling me the end of the world is nigh. You know what I mean? And they're all bringing their own data, right? It's like they all have a pet data scientist that they somehow know. You know what I mean? They'll shove articles in front of you and everything. And here's the thing. If people wonder my reaction to it, I've taken a fairly moderate road. I tend to believe the CDC, tend to. Do I believe that maybe they got some stuff wrong along the way? Sure, just like everybody does, right? Did I run around without a mask? No. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's things that were kind of a reasonable middle place to be. But I bring that example up because that's a perfect example of where, like, people they don't trust content anymore. They don't trust that it's saying the right thing anymore, which is a shame. So what happens is when people wander up to your website, they're looking for one key thing first, what you don't do. because that's the thing they know they need to figure out. Because services firms will tend to be like, yeah, we can do that. We've got smart people. We can do that. We've got smart people. And everybody knows that. So the services firm that's just like super crystal clear, this is the kind of market we don't serve. This is the kind of offering we don't, give to the market. This is kind of a boundary condition based on price or size of engagement or whatever. It creates trust, because that's what somebody's looking to get initially with a services firm. And if you force them to hunt and pack for what you don't do, one of a few things are going to happen that you don't like. Either they're going to come up with their own idea of what you don't do, which might not be appropriate, right? Or they're going to think you're a generalist that does everything. That doesn't win a deal. Or your competitors are going to define what you don't do. And you don't want that to happen either. And the very last thing I'd say about this is that if you think how we even buy product, you go to Amazon. Do you automatically buy it based on the 5-star reviews? No, you resort it by 1-star reviews, right? Because you're like, I don't know who wrote the 5-star reviews. Maybe it was the manufacturer themselves, right? But these 1-star reviews, those look legit, right? They're saying what it doesn't do. And maybe that still means you go buy it because now you know what the bounds are on it. So I think that's why it's so critical. And again, I think the reason why service firms struggle with it is they think of people as their asset, which is right. And that means that that asset's a little bit fungible. Like those smart people can do lots of amazing things, but there are limits. There just are. Like we serve the B2B technology sector. Now you might look at that and say, well, that could be everything from spaceships to HVAC systems for commercial buildings, because that's technology, to software. And we have to explain to clients like, yeah, only basically cloud services, software platforms, and hardware. So if Elon Musk comes calling, as much as I love the guy, I think it's cool what he's doing. Although as we're recording this, he's blowing up a Starship a week, basically right now. But like, but that'll stop. I mean, he got the Raptor to work. I mean, he got the previous one to work, the bit that's been launching astronauts for a while. So, the point is, if he came calling, I'd love to go work for the guy. I'd love to do things with rockets, but it's not our lane. You got to make these boundary conditions and stick to them.
Dude sent a car into space.
Right. I mean,
that's
how can
awesome.
you not?
No, I'm just saying.
I know people that don't like his style, but I don't really so much think about him, the person. I mean, inventors. I mean, Steve Jobs was not an awesome human being. Go read his biography. Yeah. You did not want to be his family member, right? But they made great laptops and they made great phones. I mean, Andrew Carnegie was probably not a great human being either to know personally, right? I mean, so if you separate out those things and you look at, sure, you'd like people to be great human beings, but if they're not, then there's the separate issue of like, what are they doing? And this guy's doing some amazing stuff, right? I mean, he's got his misses. The Tesla truck might need a little bit of work, and there's a few other things that, might need some help, but I don't know. He's a pretty cool inventor. But I say all that.
I got a little man crush on him. I don't know. So the servicing firms, what are you finding is working really well with marketing?
I would say it's a few things. One, like I said, really clear content that states what you don't do right up front is super important. I would say that social should have a narrow place. Social is one of those things where I'll say it this way, like marketers have invented, for better or worse, and I say this broadly, marketers have invented 7 trillion statistics to prove they're doing something, but they're not generating leads, right? This doesn't exist in sales. Like in sales, very quickly, your sales manager says, but you didn't sell anything. Yeah, I know you wrote 12 proposals, but you didn't sell anything. Right. In marketing, there's like brand awareness statistics, and there's social uplift statistics, and there's how many people liked my tweet, and there's how many liked my Facebook post or retweeted my tweet. And it can be very difficult with social sometimes to make that connection back to something meaningful for the services firm business. The other problem with social is it's personal. So in a business where you have smart people who probably have decent personalities that are probably pretty engaging, they can probably be pretty engaging on social. But I would say, look really closely, look at your analytics. Are you actually driving any leads through the website through that social? Another thing that I think is a little bit more of a miss is services firms have always had a huge emphasis on conference attendance. And I think what's happening here a lot of times is that the people who are going to those conferences aren't separating their ego from outcomes at the end of the day. It's great to go to the conference and have 300 people in front of you and say, you're awesome. I've been fortunate enough to do that. I think the largest room I ever talked to a conference was about like 1,000+ people. It's amazing. I mean, you stand up there and you feel like this is super, super great. But the problem is, at the end of that, are you willing 3 months later to say, yeah, they loved me, but there wasn't the right people in the room, right? Or maybe they weren't the right level of economic buyer, or maybe they were in the wrong industry lane for you to actually service, right? And conferences are full of that, because the conference organizer's goal is to get as many butts and seats as they can. They don't care if they're your ideal customer profile. So you got to really look at those things and say, am I flying to Singapore to give that talk because I just like telling people I flew to Singapore? Or are you actually doing that because you're going to generate meaningful business out of it? And again, that ties back to services firms' main asset is people. If you have really creative, smart people, it can be fairly fulfilling to have that kind of reaction from a crowd and engage with people, things like that. So I would say it's super clear messaging is one of the things people need, where it says you don't do, what you don't do. And then the other two things, I'd say a reasonable investment in pay-per-click. I've had a lot of services firms say, like, I don't think anybody will click my ad. I don't do anything like that. Here's a funny thing. Most people don't even know they clicked an ad. Google makes it so exceedingly hard for the average quick person browsing through to know that they clicked an ad. I mean, if you've looked at the size of the ad icon next to, an ad in Google, they've turned it down to like 4 pixels or something. I mean, it's like laughably small now. I mean, Google wouldn't be serving up all those ads at the top of the page if the only people clicking it were people that wanted to buy hair dryers, right? Like they work, and they're incredibly tunable and just kind of magical in what you can get done. So I would say, if you sum all this up, tight messaging that says what you don't do, a really good emphasis on some pay-per-click, getting out of a few things that might actually have a good ego gratification, but you probably can't draw a line to what matters. And clearly, the very last thing would be blogging, but even here, I would tie it to social. A lot of professional services firms have a blogging strategy that kind of looks like this. I write smart blog posts and my clients tell me they like them. And I would say, okay, good. Are you sending those blog posts to clients and they're telling you they like them? Great. But what about these things? Do you have any idea if anybody's finding those blog posts through Google? They might not be. The only feedback you're getting is from when you hand it to people. And then on top of it, ask yourself this question. Do your existing clients ever go back to your site after they've started working with you? And what you'll find with most services firms is they don't really, because once they've connected to the individuals that they actually wanted to work with, the human beings in the services firm, that's what they wanted. They don't have as much of an inclination to go back to the site. And so your site really needs to be optimized for kind of the first-time seeker, the person who's looking for you, which might mean you need to blog about a very different type of content than would maybe meet the needs of long-lasting clients. So if that makes sense, you got these people who like blog to their long-lasting account base, but those folks might not be coming back except when you shove a blog post in front of them. So all this gets figured out, though, if you get real about the metrics. Like, what that you're doing actually is generating leads through the site. The other stuff, maybe just stop doing, even if it makes you feel good. I mean, at the end of the day, if it's not generating leads, it's not a good marketing activity.
What have you found, and you mentioned sales, what have you found are some techniques and tactics there to get the most out of your sales team?
There's a few different things. One thing, services firms, I've said this over the years, clients think about a numerator and a denominator whenever they look at a proposal, right? And this is true of almost anything you buy, basically. You buy a car, you think of it in terms of like how many miles I'm going to get out of it. You think of like the longevity of the car, and you look at the price point. Sure, there's some of it is just like, I love a car like that. But at some point you have like the value of the thing and you divide it by something, right? Whatever that something is. And I say that because in services sales, it's very hard for the client sometimes to figure out what they're dividing by. Are they taking $20,000 and dividing it by your experience? Well, That's a tough division problem. Have you made that easy for them? Do they understand how your experience compares to someone else's level of experience, right? Are they dividing by the number of coaching sessions you have with them? Okay, that's a little more manageable. But have you made it clear how your coaching sessions differentiate from somebody else, right? Or are they dividing by, like in our case, maybe we do a lot of research in the tech sector. They might be dividing by the number of focus groups or surveys we run for X price, right? And what I think a lot of sellers forget is they don't think about that when they're writing the proposal, particularly the cost slide. You know, they might very quickly put in a cost, make it a big aggregate amount, and kind of try to hope to wow them with kind of like the plan that preceded that in the slide deck. And we always make a big point about when you get to the cost slide, make it super clear what the client can divide by. Don't let them make that choice on their own, because you know where you're going to be strong in that standpoint. So I think that's a big thing. I I'll stop there in case you want to go somewhere else, but that's like a huge thing on the sales side, but I've got other things I can mention too.
What about making the two work more seamlessly? Because, you know, that's a big problem in the sector is marketing and sales, you know, kind of butting heads. So have you found any tips there to make that more seamless or work better together?
Yeah. I would say one of the biggest things is that, and this is probably somewhat antithetical to some folks that might be listening, but the best messaging in professional services, its root is on the sales side. If you cracked open a lot of like marketing and sales teams in larger professional services firms, one, marketing and sales is like the traditional little bit of a war. And marketing thinks that sales has a lot of anecdotes, but they don't really matter. And to briefly touch that, the problem there is sales needs to take all of those interactions they're having, and like, instead of running over to marketing and saying, I just had a meeting, this amazing thing happened, I used this great phrase, this is really important. What they need to do is I say, I had 10 meetings like this with a customer like this, and I said these things, and it led to this amount of revenue. Marketing will sit up and take notice to that. So, and that's how we run things around here. Like, it's not like sales just rolls into a marketing meeting and says, hey, I know all the words you need to say. No, that doesn't fly. But what they do is they come into a joint meeting we hold called client creation. That's what I ended up calling it a few years ago. We all get together once a week, the marketing and the sales team, and we tackle kind of significant questions or problems. And in the earliest days, there's a lot of like workshopping what messaging that works. And like I said, what you see in a lot of companies is they discount what sales is saying. And some of that's because sales isn't saying it the right way. And the marketers might go off and try to write messaging, but now they're writing messaging and they're not the ones having the client interactions. So how is that going to work? Right. And frankly, that's when they sometimes call us and say, why don't you have us do some research? Right. And we'll go research a customer base or whatever. But one of the first things we always ask is, in a kickoff, can we talk to your head of sales? Because I want to know the kind of interaction they're having with customers so we can flow that into whatever messaging we're going to build. So I think it's more about making them understand that they're jointly creating something, as opposed to marketing going off and saying, look at all the metrics we're moving, but they're not lead generation. And sales going off and saying, marketing builds a bunch of stuff we don't need. Well, I think that's an executive problem, right? Like I lead our client creation meeting. And if we got bigger at some point, we're 25 people now, but if we got bigger and I had a VP of sales and marketing, they would lead that meeting. I want somebody who's basically above both teams to lead a weekly meeting where both teams are going, I get it. We are jointly trying to create clients. And that's the goal of each of our teams. We're not off in our fiefdoms trying to justify our metrics and never actually meeting into something that's actionable. So that's what I think.
One of the things you mentioned, I think, is this age of narrow. Can you give me more insight on that?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what age of narrow is and what the major benefit you think it is that it provides.
Well, the age of narrow ties a little bit back to something we talked about earlier, where I said, you know, people will go to things and they're looking for what it doesn't do. And in the age of narrow means that in general, people want as narrow an experience as possible. And I don't mean narrow thinking. That's a separate thing. We don't need more of that. But by narrow experience, I mean, if you looked at everybody's Netflix queue, it would probably be fairly narrow. Like maybe all you're doing is watching Elizabethan dramas, right? Or you're watching Russian sci-fi because it's all you can watch, right? Because you can get it through Amazon and Prime. I have, for some reason, a love of Russian sci-fi. I don't know why. And so they're fun to watch. It's they don't seem to care too much about the particulars, and it's kind of fun to watch. So anyway, you have these kind of personal experiences where people have very narrow channels that they're funneling kind of their life experiences through. And in one way, that's great, right? Who wants to go back to 3 channels and 2 newspapers and whatever, right? But what that's doing is when people come to you and they want to buy something from you, way back in the back part of their brain is like, I have this way of doing the rest of my life. And I want it to apply when I hire a consultant. And I want it to apply when I hire like a B2B service or buy a B2B product. And the way you lance that is you go back to saying what you don't do. You make the lane narrow. You make it super clear what you do and what you don't do. And they go, oh, I was looking for Russian sci-fi. Great. I'm in the right spot. And so that's what I started calling the age of narrow, that like people basically want these kind of narrow experiences in their personal lives. And it's now transitioned over to the world of business that they want very much the same thing. And to give you one vignette on this, like to show you kind of how I ended up here a million years ago, is like I was in a meeting with a guy at HP. He was a vice president. And I was super excited because I was like, it's a vice president and it's HP, you know, Hewlett Packard. This is going to be great. And he started asking me like, what do you do? And I said, yeah, we do that. And then he asked me, do you do this? And I said, yeah, we do that. And he asked me, do you do this? And I said, we do that. All of which was true. We did do all that. By the time I got to the 4th thing, he held out his hand. Never a good sign when somebody holds out your hand in a meeting, if it isn't you, right? And he says, I know you want to leave the aperture wide open. And I went, oh, okay, I've messed up, right? He basically is telling me, I need you to be really focused in a particular lane for me to trust you initially. Over time, you can make hay in other areas if you want. And so, yeah, I just think it's kind of an insurmountable trend. I mean, we are going to be able to have, for better or worse, more and more narrow experiences, you know, particularly digitally. That creates its own set of problems if you want to think about it socially and politically. But if you want to think about it from a buying standpoint, you're just swimming upstream if you keep telling everybody, we're awesome. We're the only thing, I mean, you know, we're awesome. We can do everything. We can serve all these different types of accounts and client bases. People are looking at you and they're just not believing it. So make it easy for them.
What about culture? I see a lot of service firms just fail to install good culture, and it creates all kinds of issues. So what's some of your advice about making sure that doesn't happen, and instilling a really good culture in your team?
Well, the first thing on culture I would say is don't turn it into a gift giving exercise. I think too often, for a lot of historical reasons, we kind of ended up here. You could blame millennials, but that's not right, because it wasn't millennials managing millennials. So it was somebody that wasn't a millennial making those decisions, right? And so we've turned culture a little bit into, how big can I make the corporate cafeteria? You know, how many nice chairs can I give people to sit in? You know, and I don't think that's what people want. People want to know they're contributing to something meaningful. It's not about what you give them. It's about the level of contribution they can make. There's a buddy of mine, Dan Cox, who runs this outfit called Exos Advisors, super great outfit. And they do a lot of analysis of like organizations and where people can have like their best play inside the organization. And the way he puts it all the time is this, and I use this line around the company all the time, which is why I brought it up. He says, where can you make your greatest contribution? You know, where, and that's what people want. They want to contribute. Sure, you can flood them with gifts. You can give them as many off days as you want. But that's not really what they want. And the other thing I would say is people like to be apprenticed, right? They don't necessarily like as much to be trained and then just dumped into an environment. And I think over the years, as much as I really love teaching and educating, training has morphed into this thing that's very mechanical. And if we look at how people like to learn, they actually probably like to be apprenticed more, meaning over a period of months or weeks, et cetera, your team gets smarter and smarter. It's not about like a 2-day training event and then they go off and do things. A good example of this, just to put a fine point on it, is like when we do reviews of content around here, like in our marketing team, one of the things I'll tell new marketers all the time is, I don't care how often I see it. You can send me your deliverable 19 times. I am never going to count how many times I reviewed it, because all I care about is that it was great in the end. And that's apprenticeship. Training is like, hey, here's our guide to writing a good blog post. Read it and somehow magically write great blog posts, right? And I think we've kind of morphed culture to be a little too much on the training side, and we've forgotten apprenticeship, which has been with us for hundreds and hundreds of years. So those are at least a couple things I think to think about on the culture side.
Sean, thanks for joining us today. Where can everybody go to learn more?
You can just check me out on the web at cascadeinsights.com. And my contact info is sean@cascadeinsights.com. Always happy to talk to folks. And if you're not a fit for us, but you're just an entrepreneur or a service firm owner, and you're just like, can I just, share a few minutes with you and kind of chat about some of the problems I'm having? I'm always happy to do that, independent of what we offer to the market, because I just think it's something I can pay forward in terms of, helping out other folks.
Awesome. Love that, man. Again, thanks for your time today.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So listen, make sure you go to cascadeinsights.com. That's cascadeinsights.com. Ton of great information there that will help you take a professional services firm and really grow it, scale it responsibly, and do it in a way where you can maximize your freedom, maximize your profits, and really have the business, the culture that you want to have. But there's a lot to learn, and you might as well, as Warren Buffett says, it's good to learn from your mistakes, but even better to learn from somebody else's, right? So go ahead and take all the knowledge and experience that Sean has helping other businesses and building his own over decades, and be able to put that to use for your business. It all starts at cascadeinsights.com. So make sure you check it out now. Cascadeinsights.com. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.